10 minutes before the helicopter is due to touch down on the North Sea rig, a sound cuts through the cabin. The passengers glance around, uneasy, but say nothing. So the noise is ignored, and the countdown to disaster is triggered. The North Sea is harsh, unpredictable, and deadly. In winter, waves can rise over 15 meters, about as tall as a 5-story building. Wind gusts have reached more than 87 knots, the force of a Category 2 hurricane. Water temperatures stay just above freezing, making the odds of survival in any type of accident quite low. But beneath these dangerous waters lie vast oil and gas deposits, which means companies will send men to harness that energy for a profit. In the 1970s, platforms like Brent Delta and Forties Alpha were built to access those deposits, each platform holding hundreds of workers, engineers, and support crew. Each platform houses its own small community about 54 nautical miles from shore. But getting people there was hard. Ships were slow and at the mercy of rough seas, sometimes taking more than a day to travel a distance that would take less than an hour by road. The expense of a ship to ferry the workers, multiplied by the number of workers in transit, adds up to a significant amount of lost time and money. Helicopters changed everything. They could carry people, cargo, and emergency teams crossing over 100 nautical miles of open water in just over an hour. They became essential for fast crew changes that boats couldn't handle efficiently. By the 1980s and 1990s, helicopters were the offshore industry's lifeline, making tens of thousands of flights each year from Stavanger and Bergen in Norway and Aberdeen in Scotland. A common helicopter in use was the Eurocopter AS332 Super Puma. It's a medium-sized utility model with 4 blades and 2 engines, built for 2 crew and 18 passengers. In the early 2000s, many oil companies banned the use of the middle rear seat, which cut capacity to 17 passengers. They found it was too difficult to evacuate 3 passengers through the back window in an emergency. The AS332 later evolved into the EC225 model with a 5-bladed rotor and more engine power, but kept the same main rotor gearbox. The EC225 Super Puma was a twin-engine, medium-sized helicopter, longer and more modern than the original AS332. It carried 2 crew and 19 passengers with 4-point safety belts and high back seats to support the head and neck during a crash. On the 1st of April 2009, Bond Offshore Helicopter Flight 85N was set to make several trips from Aberdeen to oil platforms in the North Sea. The original AS332 Super Puma had just returned from the Bruce platform. With its rotors still turning, the crew changed over. The new pilot received a brief, the aircraft was refueled, and passengers began boarding. At 10:42, the helicopter took off for the BP Miller oil field, about 145 nautical miles northeast of Aberdeen. The flight was uneventful, but 10 minutes before landing, the passengers heard a strange noise. They didn't think it was serious, so no one told the crew. At 11:49, the helicopter landed on the BP platform. With the rotors still spinning, the passengers disembarked, the aircraft was refueled, and 14 new passengers boarded for the return flight to Aberdeen. The weather was good, with light south to southeasterly winds, clear skies, and a few broken clouds between. Flying conditions were smooth, and the sea was calm. At 12:03, the helicopter took off and climbed to 610 meters on its return to Aberdeen. At 12:54, the co-pilot made a routine call to report 14 passengers on board, the helicopter in good condition, and an estimated arrival time at 13:14. 12 seconds later, the pilot sent a mayday call, followed by the co-pilot repeating the mayday with details about their location. The helicopter briefly climbed to 670 meters, then turned right and began a rapid descent. A crew member on the vessel Normand Aurora saw the helicopter drop sharply and hit the sea about 2 nautical miles away from their location. The 4 main rotor blades and hub separated and fell into the water nearby. An explosion followed, sending grey smoke into the air that soon turned black. The crew member raised the alarm and Aurora turned toward the crash site about 11 nautical miles northeast of Peterhead, Scotland. The Normand Aurora launched a fast rescue boat as it headed toward the crash site. At Aberdeen, the radar controller confirmed the mayday and tried to reach the flight crew. He asked another helicopter on a similar route to check the sea where Flight 85N had last appeared on radar. Both the rescue boat and the helicopter reached an area of disturbed water about 150 meters wide. They found debris from the helicopter, 2 life raft, and 8 people wearing survival gear. No survivors. Search and rescue teams reached the site within 40 minutes and recovered floating debris. On the evening of the 2nd of April, a survey vessel working for the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency scanned the seabed with high-definition sonar. The next day, it located the main wreckage at a depth of 100 meters, fuselage, main rotor, and tail boom. Because of the depth, the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau hired a saturation diving recovery vessel to bring it up. On the 4th of April, a diving support vessel arrived on site. By the next day, all 8 remaining bodies were recovered from the fuselage. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder were also retrieved and sent to the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau in Farnborough, along with the wreckage for analysis. Investigators from the UK Air Accident Investigation Branch focused quickly on the main rotor gearbox. The rotor head had torn free from the fuselage. The engines were intact and the controls hadn't failed. Something inside the gearbox had broken apart with force too great for the structure to survive. A helicopter's engines spin fast, but the rotors must actually turn more slowly than the engine. The Super Puma's twin engines run at 23,000 revolutions per minute, but the main rotor turns at about 265 revolutions per minute. The main rotor gearbox reduces the engine speed by about 87 times while transferring thousands of horsepower to the rotor mast. It has 2 sections. The lower section, called the main module, cuts the input speed to about 2,400 revolutions per minute. Above it sits the epicyclic reduction gearbox, which reduces it further to about 265 revolutions per minute. Inside the upper module is the second stage planetary gear system. A central sun gear drives several planet gears that spin inside a ring gear. As the sun gear turns, the planets orbit and share the load evenly, spreading out the enormous forces. In the Super Puma, these planet gears take some of the heaviest stress in the aircraft, each handling power in tens of thousands of horsepower. They spin for hours under heavy loads, and if one fails, the result can be catastrophic. To detect problems early, the gearbox has magnetic chip detectors that collect metal debris in the oil. If a gear or bearing begins to wear, the detectors sense the metal filings and trigger a warning. In theory, this allows engineers to find and fix issues before a failure happens in flight. Inside the damaged epicyclic module, investigators found a second stage planet gear with its rim split open. Microscopic analysis showed curved lines on the fracture surface, proving a fatigue crack had grown slowly through the steel. A tiny flaw formed deep inside the gear, spreading slightly with each rotation until it finally reached the rim, which caused the whole system to fail. When the rim broke, the gear shattered, sending steel fragments into nearby components and jamming the gearbox. The engines kept turning, forcing power into the jammed system until the weakest link, the connection between the rotor head and the fuselage, snapped, tearing the rotor apart. Investigators then found something more concerning. 36 flight hours before the crash, a chip detector had picked up microscopic metal fragments just a few millimeters wide. Maintenance engineers examined them, but because procedures for interpreting chip debris were unclear, they simply cleaned the detector and returned the helicopter to service. No one recognized that those metal particles came from the planet gear rim, an early warning of a hidden crack. The Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau concluded that the second stage planet gear failure caused the crash. The fatigue crack had developed slowly, releasing fragments that hinted at a serious fault. But without clear guidance, the warning went unnoticed. In the months after the crash, the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau issued urgent safety recommendations. Helicopter operators were told to treat every fragment from chip detectors as a serious warning. New procedures were created to improve how metal debris was analyzed. The message was clear: metallic debris in the gearbox isn't routine. It can signal a catastrophic failure already in progress. The industry acted quickly. European regulators temporarily grounded the Super Puma L2 fleet. Flight operators, Bond Offshore, CHC and Bristow, carried out detailed inspections of their helicopters. Airbus helicopters released new service bulletins, redesigned components, upgraded chip detection systems, and assured operators that the risk was understood and reduced. By 2010, in less than a year, the Super Puma fleet was cleared to fly again. The helicopters returned to service over the North Sea, carrying hundreds of workers daily, and confidence in the fleet slowly returned. Today, there are industries that support the safety of the men and women who work offshore. Part of that safety training is HUET, or Helicopter Underwater Escape Training, which all offshore workers must complete. A helicopter body is lowered into the water and spun upside down to simulate a water crash landing, and trainees must escape. The passengers and crew on board the Super Puma didn't really have a chance to escape in the water, and the next story is no different. On the 29th of April 2016, 7 years after Flight 85N, a CHC helicopter service aircraft lifted off in the Norwegian sector of the North Sea. CHC operated flights for Statoil ASA, now Equinor, including routes from Bergen Airport, Flesland, to the Gullfaks oil field. The helicopter, an Airbus EC225LP Super Puma, a newer version of the same family as Flight 85N, was operating as Flight 241. That morning, the crew had already completed one round trip to the Gullfaks C platform and returned to Flesland. At 10:05, they departed again for Gullfaks B. After landing on the platform, the rotors kept spinning as passengers disembarked and 11 new ones boarded. The turnaround lasted 12 minutes. At 11:16, Flight 241 took off for its return to Flesland, climbing to 900 meters with the co-pilot in control. The helicopter cruised at 900 meters until reaching the coastline, then descended to 610 meters after clearance from air traffic control, flying at 140 knots. Moments later, engine speed dropped sharply. The main rotor tilted erratically. There was metallic screeching, then a loud bang. The rotor separated completely and the helicopter began to fall in a ballistic arc. People on the ground over a mile away heard the metallic noise and looked up to see the helicopter falling without its rotors. Some nearby witnesses saw parts breaking away. 8 divers preparing to dive at Turoy Quay heard the noise. 2 had helmet cameras that recorded the event. Without its rotor, the helicopter rolled right almost a full turn, yawed to the right, then rolled left as the nose dropped vertically. At about 11:55, it struck the small island of Storskitolmen near Turoy in Øygarden municipality, killing all 13 people instantly. The impact destroyed the helicopter and most wreckage slid into the sea, resting a few meters offshore at a depth of about 5 meters. A white cloud of fuel vapor rose and ignited, starting a fire on the island. Wreckage, fuel, and oil spread across land and sea. The detached main rotor flew separately, landing at Storskora Island less than half a mile north of the main crash site. At 11:57, a surveillance aircraft spotted smoke over the area and confirmed the crash. Air Traffic Services immediately notified the Joint Rescue Coordination Centre for Southern Norway. At 12:01, 6 minutes after impact, rescuers began to arrive. A rigid inflatable boat reached the crash site first, followed a minute later by 2 smaller boats. The Sotra Fire Department arrived with 3 vehicles and 6 personnel. 2 firefighters were taken to the small island, but found that life-saving efforts were impossible. Soon after, additional responders from Øygarden and Bergen Fire Department arrived, joined by police, Norwegian Armed Forces, air ambulance crews, and civil defense units. At 13:05, the first diver entered the water. Recovery efforts began immediately after the crash. Within 24 hours, the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder were retrieved from the sea. On the 30th of April 2016, the main wreckage was lifted from the water and the detached main rotor was recovered from Storskora Island. Parts of the main gearbox, including 2 pieces of a fractured second stage planet gear, were found. Debris from the helicopter was spread across 180,000 square meters. Some key gearbox components and attachments were missing, prompting an extensive land and sea search. Norwegian civil defense teams scanned the shore with metal detectors, while divers from the Bergen Fire Department and the Navy searched grid sections of the seabed. A remotely operated vehicle and a 1-meter wide sledge fitted with 14 magnetic arms were used to sweep the seabed. By September 2016, the organized search ended. Most gearbox parts had been recovered, but the second stage planet gear carrier and forward suspension bar were still missing. With the agreement of the Norwegian Accident Investigation Board, the accident site became a training site for the Naval Diving School. In February 2017, during one of these training dives, the missing second stage planet carrier was finally found. Investigators from the Norwegian Accident Investigation Board, supported by the UK Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau and Airbus helicopters, examined the wreckage. Inside the gearbox, they found the second stage planet gear shattered in almost exactly the same way as the 2009 accident. Microscopic analysis showed the same failure pattern. A fatigue crack started from a tiny flaw inside the rim and slowly expanded until the rim split open. When it failed, fragments destroyed nearby gears, causing the rotor to separate from the helicopter. After Flight 241's crash, engineers and investigators were left asking how a gearbox could fail so completely without warning. To find out, they studied how fatigue fractures form and why they're so hard to detect inside a helicopter gearbox. The second stage planet gear in a Super Puma is roughly the size of a dinner plate, made from ultra-hard steel and weighing several kilograms. Every time the rotor turns, its teeth mesh correctly with others, transmitting thousands of horsepower 265 times a minute, millions of times over its lifetime. Inside the steel, stress is enormous. Though the gear looks solid, it's made of microscopic crystals with tiny flaws. Over time, these flaws concentrate stress, forming cracks hidden beneath the surface. The cracks grow invisibly and don't release fragments until they reach the surface, often just before total failure. This means the problem isn't missing a warning. It's a failure with no warning at all. Chip detectors, the main safety system, only work when fragments circulate in the gearbox oil. If the crack stays internal, there's nothing to detect until it's too late. Even then, chip detectors have limits. They're small magnetic plugs, just a few centimeters long, that only attract particles passing close by. Oil moves unpredictably through the gearbox, so not all debris reaches the detector, and tiny cracks might not release fragments at all. For Flight 241, investigators determined the gear failed internally without releasing debris, completely bypassing the only available warning system. Helicopter gearboxes are both vital and fragile. They take on extreme forces with no backup. When they fail, the aircraft simply falls out of the sky. In 2009, the warning was missed. In 2016, there was no warning. Both ended the same way. The rotor tore free and lives were lost within seconds. In the months after the crash, European regulators grounded all EC-225 and AS-332 Super Puma helicopters. Offshore workers refused to fly in them, even staging protests and calling the aircraft coffins with rotors. Airbus helicopters worked to regain confidence by redesigning gears, improving monitoring systems, and introducing stricter inspection procedures. They put the failure down to a rare manufacturing flaw that had been fixed. Oil workers weren't convinced. In the UK and Norway, the unions demanded that Super Pumas were taken out of service. By 2017, major operators like Bristow and CHC confirmed they would discontinue the EC-225 for the North Sea service. That decision ended the Super Puma's role in the region. They still fly in other parts of the world, but in the UK and Norway, the name Super Puma is linked with tragedy and loss. To watch our latest disaster video, click the link on screen now.